Welcome back to another Toontown Mysteries video full of your ideas, thoughts, and suggestions. As always, keep them coming in so I can have more to answer, and of course, let's get into it. In buildings and HQs for cogs, you see other cogs working at a desk. Does that mean some cogs don't fight toons but rather stay in-house to work behind the scenes, or are they other kinds of cogs built uniquely for this? In my opinion, I would say that they're definitely the same types of cogs, whether they're telemarketers, name droppers, ambulance chasers, whatever they may be. They're working behind the scenes trying to make Toontown a dull and gray place. Do the toons have other enemies or threats other than cogs? Same question for the cogs, do they have other threats that aren't just toons? I would say as far as I've seen, there aren't any apparent enemies to toons other than cogs, goons, bosses, and things that are boring or gray like oil. That being said, there are times where you see things like the spiders or bats and jungle vines that definitely aren't friendly in nature, but I wouldn't necessarily consider them enemies. Toons sometimes have environmental threats though, such as trains running over them or the aforementioned oil. Now cogs, from what I've seen, also deal with minimal enemies or threats outside of toons. I'd go as far as saying the only other enemy cogs would have to face would be doodles. At least that's the only other kind of threat I've seen for them. Field offices, look at their design, they have eyes. Does this mean cog buildings could be cogs themselves? Are they built as a cog from the start, or did they make them using other existing cog parts? Can a cog get promoted? And does it have sentient arms and legs buried underground? Okay, so I think this concept has to start with the fundamentals of Toontown. Toontown was inspired by the Roger Rabbit cartoon, in which it depicts buildings in Toontowns having their own eyes or faces or expressions, a symbol of liveliness, as if the buildings themselves are alive. Now imagine how that transfers when the cog influence comes into play. Turn the building dark, gray, and disappointing, and that liveliness turns into this angry, grouchy, evil appearance. The buildings always had some semblance of liveliness to them, but now it's being portrayed as the cogs would prefer. Of all the cogs they could have chosen, why is it that on the top floor of the cog building, there is a statue of a bottom feeder and a telemarketer? Honestly, I'm not 100% sure why those cogs were chosen, especially considering that the telemarketer has the wrong body type. If I had to say anything, I would say that either this design was made prior to the structuring of cogs as we know them, or that they were randomly chosen to just fit the design concept. Think of it like this. They made this room in concept and wanted to have these statues there. What parts do you use? Come up with new generic ones that you won't see anywhere else in the game, or randomly pick pieces that you think would work? That's probably what happened. Not sure if this has been answered yet, but why don't the cogs use the main elevator in the cog buildings on the street to go into the building instead of the knock-knock doors? Why don't elevators have locks on them that maybe toons have to find while defeating cogs to enter specific buildings? There's actually a technical side of this question, that being that the knock-knock doors on cog buildings are actually used as a way of controlling the street population of cogs. Cogs walking into the buildings then despawn, as well as generating new cogs to walk out onto the street to keep it populated. For the lock suggestion, firstly from a design standpoint, I think players would find it tedious. Elevators are designed to be open and freely enterable, and the cogs don't realize the problem with that until it's too late. How does a cog become an executive in Corporate Clash? It's a good question that hasn't exactly been covered yet. You could think of it as cogs that have done well in some circumstance that allows for a promotion, or perhaps there's just a higher class of cogs called executives that are manufactured. At some point I'm sure we'll cover this topic though, but now it's just fun speculation. Do you think it would be possible for a toon to be able to travel to different Toontowns, like maybe in Corporate Clash since they want to improve and add on to the game? If you want to create a headcanon in which all servers coexist, I, in my personal opinion, would strongly suggest to consider each Toontown as alternate universes, places where things have happened differently with different toons and timelines altogether. With that being said, it'd be much like the possibility of our own universe in other universes. We're not sure if it would ever be likely to even be possible to travel to different universes, but you never know. How did playing Toontown online in a browser work? Were there anything that Toontown development team wanted to put in but Disney wouldn't let them? How does locking and giving teleport access work? Why don't you get teleport access until you beat the boss at level 50? And how would a Toontown Battle Royale actually work? Toontown Online in a browser wasn't exactly in a browser, it merely downloaded and updated and launched the game all from the browser. So you'd log in, press play, and then the page would load a seltzer as you updated, and eventually the game would launch, popping up in a new window. As for Disney not allowing the development team to put items in, they were actually pretty fortunate with how well it worked out. Jesse Shell recalled one executive saying that they could not under any circumstance add swimming to the game for some reason, but you saw how it ended up working out regardless. Teleport access works in the sense that you understand how and where to teleport using your portable hole. There's a few theories about it, like the Toon Council providing approval for the teleporting to places, or that you can learn how to teleport to places by experience or being taught the right technique, thus making sense in the COG HQ teleporting, as by that point you're that far in the suit, so you've kind of figured out the teleporting technique to go straight there, or the Toon Council believes in you enough to allow you to just teleport directly there. And lastly, I feel like a battle royale would actually be kind of in a reverse format, so you start with one laugh and have to gather gags to use on other toons until they're max laugh and have a laughing fit or something that disqualifies them. Last toon remaining wins. Were there ever plans for a post-Donald's Dreamland playground or a second map? Were all estates in the Toontown map? How do Goons get promoted, and are they made in the Cellbot factory or does the CFO make them? Can Goons become EXCs? Why haven't COGs invaded estates? They seem to have no defense. And who would win in a meatball cook-off? I think the development team were always open to the idea of a new playground post DDL, but there were never any concrete development plans for a new area expansion or any World 2 second map type thing. I cover the estate topic, by the way, in my video Toontown Mysteries Outside Lands. As far as Goons go, I'm not sure if they ever do get promoted. I would assume that Goons are just made to a certain degree as shown during the CFO battle, probably somewhere likely the same way the COGs get made. And I would also think it's not possible for a Goon to become an executive. Think about it in this way. Executive COGs are COGs excelling in their work. Goons are just little henchmen. There are no executive little henchmen. Also, COGs just must not know very well where estates are, or estates must be in a location that is very well protected or deep in the heart of Toontown, thus being the reason they've never been invaded. Also, I would clearly win the cook-off with Chef Knucklehead, we all know it. How large is Toontown? The one thing that's opened my eyes in this regard was always there, but I never really thought too much into it. Playground. I know it's also known as a neighborhood, but if you think of all the locations as interconnected playgrounds, it makes you kind of understand the size of things a little more. They're still hubs, and there's still distance between them, but at the very core of things, they're just a bunch of interconnected playgrounds. But also a lot of this grand size, I'm sure, is just lost to the imagination. There's a lot of scale that you just have to pretend is there, just like COG buildings being all the same size despite being 1 to even 5 stories tall. Where do COG buildings come from, and how do Toon buildings rise up again completely unharmed? Like I mentioned earlier, buildings have always had their own kind of liveliness to them. COG buildings come from this liveliness being invaded and influenced by the evil gray dullness of the COGs. When Toons come in and battle it out, the building's liveliness returns to its normal toony self and it bursts back into toony form unharmed. What kind of a graphic and art style would Toontown ideally use if there would be a modern day remake, reboot, sequel, or reimagining? Well, I think it would still remain fairly reminiscent of the current art style. Personally, in my opinion, the more lower poly style fits with the theme of Toontown and old Disney cartoons in the 3D format. I would think definitely that things would be a bit more nuanced than the boxes, just literal boxes we have for buildings right now, but still more on the lower poly side with obviously much better textures. That being said, one of the lead artists from the Toontown Online team, Jay Friedman, continually created concepts and designs in the late stage Toontown and the prototype that featured more use of sharper lines and almost what I would call an Alice in Wonderland surreal kind of out there art style. If a COG, any COG, can take over a Toon building, why doesn't every single COG raid the streets and take over every building? It's an interesting question that I don't necessarily have the answer for. Maybe if you think about how many COGs are actually expressed inside buildings, then it makes sense to consider that maybe they just don't have a full-scale operation to attempt a full street takeover across the board, especially when it would really trigger a major reaction from all of the Toons, I would imagine. You know the cannons we used during the CJ? How long have we had them? Because I think of a few situations where it could have been useful. That is actually something I did notice when looking over the CJ from time to time, and I don't think if it's ever been really explained. Bumpy, out of almost nowhere, just tells you to use your cannons, and you pull them out like nothing is wrong with the fact that you've supposedly just been carrying a cannon in your pocket this entire time. I like the idea that you get supplied them each time you enter, but there's no dialogue and no fitting way to properly explain it. Perhaps we're just really picky when it comes to using the cannons that we supposedly carry around all day. Why does each cog look different? I mean, they're only getting promoted. Lore-wise, think about it as robots, machines, or even inventions. Better or upgraded versions of machines, robots, or inventions don't necessarily look the same as their earlier counterparts, do they? And then, of course, gameplay-wise, you want to vary the amount of villains in the game to prevent monotony as much as possible. When entering the lobby before the VP fight in Installment HQ, why do we only see toons and no real cogs? Also, if we did see cogs, would we be able to become friends with them? I think realistically the answer lies in feasibility and how necessary it would have been to include NPC cogs walking in and out of the lobby. I imagine it would have been possible, but if you can prevent having to do the extra work needed for what's basically vanity, just cogs roaming around, you do it. Plus the added bonus of not having to load or handle extra things on the screen, and probably the clutter that would happen from NPC cogs and real toons walking around. And I don't think you'd be able to make friends with them regardless. To a cog, someone asking to be a friend is most likely a suspicious thing. Alright, so thank you all for your wonderful suggestions, thoughts, and comments, and as always, keep suggesting them to me so I can cover them and answer them in the very next Mysteries video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time in my next video.